Capability building need to happen before transformation, or can capability and technology implementation happen simultaneously?
How do I answer this question? It's a question that actually requires a 30 to 40 minute or 1 hour debate, but let me try to articulate it in as simple manner as possible. The transformation, why does it not fail? Why does it not succeed in most of the companies? The strategy is not wrong. The budget is not insufficient. Insufficient. The technology is not unavailable, right? But most of the discussions I'm having with the CFOs and also the conversations with teams from international financial centers, where we are giving inputs on how to optimize and digitize the SME workflows. This is a question that comes up. Should capability building precede the transformation, or should it sit inside the transformation? In my view, the capability is not a work stream, right? It is a precondition to transformation. And the important thing there is that the capability transformation first would look at diagnosing and figuring out what are your workflows, right? As a simple example. Get to first understanding a workflow within FP&A, within accounts receivable, within accounts payable, within treasury. Take an example of forecasting. Forecasting has a great way to connect all the four. The accounts receivable and the accounts payable will tell you whether the cash inflow is slowing down, whether the cash outflow is quicker than the cash inflow. The FP&A would look at forecasting with different scenarios and assumptions, and treasury will take those inputs to figure out how much money will be deployed for investments and how much money for how long will remain idle. Thereby, treasury is then able to make decisions on what to do with idle money, for example, right? So this workflow analysis that transcends beyond one particular function is super critical, right? And the teams need enough capability to then start figuring out who are the kind of vendors that they would like to engage with and what are the tools that they would like to engage with, right? So the capability transformation first starts with building a foundation of how do you build capabilities, right? If you are looking at workflows, you're starting to play with a sandbox of toolkits first, seeing which workflows can be automated. Some of them you don't require massive, huge enterprise resource planning systems or ERPs. You could take advantage of few toolkits out there and just take few hours, see how it's helping you just reduce something that has been of a pain and frustration for many months. And that gives you confidence. The next step is you start taking some ideas to the business, and that increases your business fluency. And from that, you gain the confidence to then start making decisions. And one of the decisions is which vendor to select and what technology to adopt. And where you would need to have the discussion, you can start pushing back to the vendors on your requirements. And rather than getting something off the shelf, you can actually get it very relevant to your workflow. That is there. And during the implementation, then you are taking some of the lessons from the foundation, the capability building, and saying, okay, I would need to redesign certain job roles. There are certain skills now we've upgraded during the the capability training program. And let's now try to see that we take 1, 2, or 3 workflows and start seeing the impact of the transformation process. And that is a great network effect, Stanley, because I would then be able to say, now we've seen some kind of success, what it looks like. Could we now start taking from the sandbox toolkits to really saying whether we need a tool which is a little more complex, or do we need a tool which is simpler? It's just like, making a decision about, do you need a large language model for your work, or taking an open source LLM to just get few things done? You don't need rich features to get something done. Right. And I think that's where what you start doing is moving from that capability building through the training program, embedding the toolkits, using the sandbox to kind of test certain workflows, then selecting the vendors and starting to say that, okay, I've selected the vendor. There's a job redesign happening. We now know this new tool, how can it be adopted in a new way, not in the old way, right? And I think the success starts lying in monitoring adoption. What are the workflows that are are improving in the process. And then you're identifying few other use cases to say, okay, now we need to go to that next level of transformation, right? So you have a completely refreshed, rejuvenated team, which has gained the confidence now of making decisions and adopting technology, where the technology is not the main driver. There's a larger goal out there, but you're taking those steps to achieve that.
Right. Thanks, Suresh. So I guess really, we use the specific word of transformation, which means that uh, it's neither just about capability, nor it's about the technology, nor it's also about the mindset. All of it has to come together. And to a lot of CFOs, how can we perhaps make good use of not just short-term training programs, but also perhaps some sandbox software to actually test, pilot, and then make decisions on more longer term transformation that needs to happen, right? So next question, perhaps, how does upskilling a finance team for AI actually looks like in practice?
One of the things that became very, very popular in the last 12, 15 months was prompt engineering. And what I just want to say is that it's not simply teaching people how to use prompts that will make you AI friendly or ready for AI, right? I think the important thing is start with changing the mindset to become more business partner oriented. That's the first through that capability training and transformation program, the workflow analysis, the literacies, the scenario thinking that we were talking about. You, of course, don't forget about the risk and compliance because you are an accounting and finance person at the end of the day. What is important is that the process redesign that you're going through is going to start seeing you upskill, right? And you're going to take those steps of saying where you are. You also start seeing that you're making changes in the contribution you're making, and you're starting to reject some work that is not necessarily productive and not adding value in the whole process of achieving that business outcome. And, I started my finance career. One of the things I was told when I was um, becoming a chartered accountant and when I started in my first job is the finance and accounting team members are not good communicators. They focus largely like developers and programmers, I would say. They focus on their work sitting on the desktop, churn out reports, and explain what had really happened in the past. I think this is a fantastic opportunity now to be excellent communicators. And this capability building program and the process is not just addressing the technical skills perspective, but it is also focusing on soft skills. Some of the CFOs, for example, tell me that there's a big gap. In fact, I think it was Deloitte who did that research in 2025 and said that most of the finance teams are doing transactional work while the CFOs are focusing on hiring digital data analytics teams and new soft skill that is missing in their teams today. And the key thing there is that I'll give you a simple example of forecasting. Yeah, and in the forecasting, if I have to just kind of talk about the current challenges that you see in the financial planning and analysis teams, the forecasts are collected in different formats. The budget cycles are disconnected, right? You have this 1 month of the rolling forecast, and you have 3 months. There's a quarterly thing, there's a 6-month thing. And then within these periods, again, you have multiple iterations. The business units may submit late, or they may give you very incomplete assumptions. And the explanations of variance between actuals and forecasts, they always remain backward looking. So the financial planning and analysis team members or the FP&A team members are always catching up, right? Which should not be the case, but that's the current challenge. And because of the silos that we see, there's a very limited visibility of cash timing, cash inflow, and cash outflow for even the financial planning and analysis team members. So if I move into the stage of what is required, we have to translate this into drivers and scenarios. We have to see that the FP&A team members, how can we help them to challenge the assumptions constructively? How can they connect the profit and loss, cash and capital requirements, right? That allows them to then support the resource allocation trade-off, right? As I give you an example of the business question is, should we focus on growth or should we focus on efficiency, for example? And when we bring the treasury and the unit forecast together, you'll see magic happening, right? And a very good way of providing great inputs to the business. So I think if I take you to the next stage, it is the capability and the workflow opportunities from a perspective of automation, from the perspective of what you can do from an AI perspective is driver-based forecasting. So if you tweak certain drivers, what happens to certain top line numbers, bottom line numbers, etc. You kind of then are able to schedule this routines of review between variance of actual and forecast. You're able to model scenarios and you're able to retrieve them very easily, right? And for example, the business unit partnering becomes more easy because now from those thousands of rows of worksheets, you're now having a presentation layer. And that presentation layer is very easy for anyone to understand. And it also, if you have a very good prompt system, it will alert you as to where things are going well and where things are not going well, prompting a very proactive engagement between business and finance.
Great, thanks, Suresh. I think you sum up with like where we talk about job redesign. So many of these roles need to be redesigned, and traditionally, accountants or finance are very logical, competent numbers, data analytics people, but where they need to definitely look into is how to be better communicators. And I would say that I've worked with a lot of finance people in the past, and those people who work well in this specific role of being a partner are those who demonstrate not just knowing the numbers, but knowing the business, right? Demonstrating that they actually care about the business and they actually know, as you described, the specific drivers that would help impact the business in the biggest way. So moving on, how do finance team usually react from your experience when AI or new ERP is introduced, and how should leaders manage those reactions?
Seen excitement from early adopters. I've seen anxiety about their own job security. The fear of losing control. I remember one of the things we were taught about accounting and finance in the early part of my career was it allows you to have discipline, control, and trust. And control is a very important part of the function, right? Now, when there is a ERP coming in, how much am I letting go? And the what we start seeing is that I'm familiar with certain spreadsheets and no longer can I rely on those spreadsheets because the spreadsheets have changed. Their tables, rows, columns, the way they look. And there's an inherent silent resistance that creeps up into the finance team. And it comes out in different forms of communication, right? I was actually sitting down with with representatives from different functions, from finance, financial planning and analysis, treasury, um, accounts receivable. And what I could see there is that they knew it was coming, and the tool had been bought, but their way of expression was they were completely focused on their laptop typing, rather than seeing how that change can happen and how they can contribute to the change. So there was an inbuilt resistance, and this is the form of expression that they were reflecting, in the meeting. So I think the passive adoption, using the tool only because the management wants it, I think really is super evident in such ERP implementations or new tool implementations. I think the key thing is that the leadership has to be very alert on how to respond. Yeah. For example, explaining the purpose. And you're starting to see how you can communicate on a regular basis, involving some of the key users in designing the workflow, right? You have a scenario where you have already selected a tool without the workflow analysis. That mistake has been done, but now you need to move on. And how do you now ensure that that tool gets embraced in your workflow, right? And then you're also providing some kind of a safe environment for them to experiment. They may not be able to use all the modules straight away. So give them some time. Bring in certain benchmarks, bring in certain ways of measuring the progress. But at the same time, there is also this concept of experiment, risk, and failing, right? I think the emphasis of how you communicate about removing redundant legacy tasks, recognizing the team members and the employees who are able to identify useful improvements, right? This could be saying that, hey, we don't need to take the entire workflow into the new tool or ERP, for example. Let's now change our workflow and let's now implement a new workflow in the ERP that we have selected, right? So these are the things that should be way of encouraging the finance team, who's anyway going to go through massive, transformation from a perspective of even time management. Yep. So what they were doing in 1 hour, 2 hours, now what they're doing is that they're feeding that data into the old system, they're feeding the data into the new business system as well, right? So I think that's the super critical responsibility of the leadership, and finally ensuring that there are review and approval responsibilities attached to this whole process.
Awesome, Suresh. So now let's perhaps move into our last segment, segment four. Should CFO focus first on transforming finance or take broader role in AI adoption across the organization? Suresh, do you think should champion this transformation in any organization?
Yeah, I think you're making me now move from the capability discussion to ownership and governance, right? And I've heard many CFOs who belong to a school of thought that we are helping the overall organization to transform as a leader, but when it comes to finance transformation, we will like to be followers. Um, so that's one school of thought where we have quite a few CFOs, and then you have very specific school of thought where they say that let's transform the finance function first, lead it by example, so that then that can result in a transformation beyond finance across the organization. Yeah. In my view, the CFO should sponsor it. At the same time, the practical way is that the ownership, the CFO starts looking at who is a sponsor within his team, right? And for example, we do see that you could have special project leads within existing finance team members who have been now assigned to look at ERP implementation, or been assigned to manage multiple projects that are going on in different areas of finance, for example. And then it's equally important to get the representatives from financial planning and analysis, treasury, accounts receivable, accounts payable, and anything that is related to the finance controllership, right? It is important not to lose sight of business. And it will be, I think, the responsibility of the finance leadership to reach out to the non-finance leads in the business, who are the internal customers of finance, to say that, look, we're going through this transformation, and since it's going to impact some of the things that we would give you, and where we would need more interaction and more involvement in the decision making, could we have certain representatives who could allocate some time in this process? And wonderful thing was that, I'll take an example. We were aligning on the capability transformation program where we had finance people. And I was very surprised and pleasantly surprised to see that we had representatives from the business unit also in the same conference room, and giving right inputs as to saying, for example, that, hey, we know the finance team is struggling with the ERP. We do give data to them, and we are trying to see now how the data that we provide to them comes in a much more structured way, before they can start working on some stuff either in the old system or in the new system. So there was a recognition, and there was also the appreciation that will result in more burden of time for finance people. So how can they help, right? And I think this is a great example where uh, you also see the business functions getting involved and influencing the workflows together with finance, right? So I think that's That would be my response to you. We need to be very clear that each use case should have a finance process owner representative who is whose success is measured on adoption and business outcomes. So it's the CFO who's driving it, but the ownership also should reside with more than just the CFO, right? And that will really help in a higher adoption.
Right. And great. And last question: should a CFO focus first on transforming finance, or should they take a broader role in AI adoption across the organization?
Yeah, this is a very relevant question, Stanley. And as I was mentioning earlier to you, the should we actually begin by making finance as a credible example, or should we focus on transforming other functions and the other organization? And I'm very passionate about um, one of the statements, which is that finance has a very strong foundation in controls, governance, in the measurement and the risk, right? And it's very easy in their comfort zone to evaluate investments. So with that strong foundation that the finance team already has, um, there's a natural process for finance to look at measurable outcomes. And those measurable outcomes may not be just finance numbers. They could be non-finance indicators as well, right? So the CFO can play a broader enterprise role by helping evaluate the business cases for AI investment. One of the things that are of challenge today to many of the CFOs is AI a disruptor, or is it a defense mechanism, right? And that view is very, very important, because then you would know that where do you start investing in AI, and how do you look at productivity gains? What do you look at from a capital allocation perspective? And whether you are able to realize benefits from that investment. Because as we all know, the investment pools are very restricted, are always scarce. I mean, you're seeing today Microsoft, Meta, Google, who have been large cash cows, are now dramatically changing and raising debt in the market. And no longer you can say they are generating cash flows which are positive. So this transition of how much you need to invest, where you need to invest, is super critical from an AI perspective. And think that's where a CFO's and his team's value becomes super critical, right? And hence my answer would be that CFO focuses on making finance a credible example, at the same time then ensuring that with that example able to make transformations across the organization.